In 2012, 3 members of the band Pussy Riot stood accused of hooliganism motivated by religious hatred in Russia. During the trial, people were struck by the sight of the women held in a small glass enclosed box nested inside of the courtroom. That box is called a dock, and it was a staple in countless courtrooms across the globe and throughout history, until it was finally abolished in 2014 when the European Court of Human Rights ruled that it was incompatible with the standards of civilized behavior that are the hallmark of democratic society.
I think that has a naturally dehumanizing effect, which is going to make them seem more guilty than they might otherwise seem.
No one looks innocent sitting in a penalty box. Beyond the powerful psychological effects and symbolism, just practically speaking, the dock is hard to hear out of or see out of, and it limits contact with one's lawyers, putting the accused in a disadvantaged position. And in this case, the outcome of the trial was predetermined, for political reasons, but courtrooms like this directly interfere with and bias the outcome of a trial. But I'd argue that is always true.
People have grown to expect that there should be marble and wood paneling and columns and, all of the stuff that we see in popular media.
Since we've seen so many courtrooms on TV and in film, or maybe even in our own lives, the design of the ones that we find today in the US seems self-evident. Like maybe they're not even designed at all, just given to us from above, already worked out and without bias.
Yeah, you don't really think about it. It's hopefully at best just part of the background and not something that you're ever actively really thinking about as a lawyer, because you just take it as it's given to you,
Courtrooms are a great case study for understanding how design puts certain individuals in power over others through physical position, orientation, and dress. They're also spaces governed by procedure and ritual. And while it seems like they should be the ultimate room where form should always follow function, it's rarely that simple.
I've been in so many courtrooms where there's just stacks of equipment and paper and everything is strewn about everywhere, and it just makes a mess.
Instead, they're the result of tradition, technology, and core human beliefs coupled with personal taste. So why are courtrooms the way that they are? What governs their design, and how does this design factor into the proceedings and create bias? To get to the bottom of that, I reached out to the resident law expert.
Hi, I'm Devin Stone. I am a practicing lawyer and the lawyer that runs the world's largest law-related YouTube channel, Legal Eagle.
Could you describe a little bit about your relationships to courtrooms or in your experiences with them?
For better or worse, I have been in probably hundreds of courtrooms now in my career. It's one of the occupational hazards. You kind of take it for granted that it is this thing that is the location of trials and the courtroom proceedings. And for better or worse, I think people put a lot of respect into the legal profession and getting things adjudicated in front of a judge or jury. And I think it's probably in everyone's interest in the legal field to play into that so that when lay people who are not dealing with this stuff every single day come into a courtroom, there is a little bit of shock and awe and assuming that, the judge is actually an authority figure.
Upon stepping into an American courtroom, citizens anticipate a specific architectural arrangement, one that presents a formidable jury led by an even mightier judge, staging a clash between prosecution and defense, an opulent edifice adorned with symbols of justice. But beyond all this theatrics, there's a lot of logistics governing how things work and where they go. Some of the primary considerations in a courtroom are the flow of people, while they need to be kept physically separate. Sightlines, each player has a unique set of needs for observing and communicating with other individuals. There's also factors like lighting and acoustics, security, flexibility, symbolism, and so on. The way that these factors are dealt with in a courtroom design demonstrates our values and the role of courts in our society at large. This process has evolved over time, and that leads to some parts of the courtroom being there for tradition rather than functional necessity. During the early colonial era, courtrooms were often simple and utilitarian spaces. Court proceedings took place in multi-purpose buildings such as meeting houses or public taverns, so the courtroom design varied widely, and there wasn't any specific consideration for how its design could enable more functionality. As the colonies developed, they drew inspiration from British legal traditions. This influence can be seen in the design of early courthouses. Courtrooms in the late 18th and early 19th century featured a layout similar to their British forebears, with a raised bench for the judge, a witness box, and seating for the jury. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, courtrooms underwent a shift toward neoclassical architectural styles. Inspired by ancient Greek and Roman designs, courthouses featured grand entrances, imposing facades, and interior elements such as columns, domes, and ornate moldings. These neoclassical features symbolized the authority and grandeur of the justice system, reflecting the ideals of the new nation. Notable examples include the old Supreme Court chamber in the United States Capitol, featuring a semicircular layout. Then during the 19th century, courtroom design began incorporating more symbols and imagery. The American flag and state seals became common symbols displayed in courtrooms, emphasizing the connection between justice and the nation. Additionally, scales of justice, blindfolded Lady Justice statues, and other symbolic elements were introduced to underscore the impartiality and fairness of the legal process. The early 20th century witnessed the modernization of courtroom interiors, driven by changing societal needs and advancements in technology. Improved acoustics, better lighting systems, and the incorporation of microphones and speakers enhanced the audibility and visibility of court proceedings.
If I'm thinking about an ideal courtroom or courthouse, probably the things that I would focus on are very mundane. I think the first thing is that it would need to be really adapted to technology. Back in the day, I remember using an overhead projector or an Elmo, and you'd just be using these documents and you'd be projecting them up on a screen somewhere, and it was always sort of a hodgepodge. And now courtrooms are getting much, much better at realizing that lawyers use technology, the jury or the judge needs to have access to exhibits, and the best way to do that is through technology. So the last thing you want to have to deal with is a stack of paper, and then you're physically handing out copies or whatever.
The layout and seating arrangements have been optimized for a more efficient and accessible courtroom overall. And today we've pretty much locked into a few key configurations that are defined by the locations of the main parties in the proceedings. These have a set of sightlines and connections that must be maintained, while others are a little bit more fluid. For instance, the judge must maintain unbroken views over everyone in the area called the well, and everyone must view them. While, say, the court reporter only needs to keep their eyes on the witness, attorney tables, and judge, while never really needing to be seen by anyone else. This complex web of relationships has solidified into three primary layouts in the US: the center bench layout, the corner bench, and then what's called the Jeffersonian or Virginia Revival. The first two are historically the most common, with the center bench being preferred if you have more space, usually around 40 feet by 60 feet. The corner bench is smaller and more square. The Jeffersonian Revival is less common, but has some unique features that are valued today, and it's gaining popularity. But first, a quick look at the center bench layout. The courtroom usually has three entrances, one for spectators, one for jurors, and then one for judges. These entrances are connected to spaces that are deeper in the building that have restricted access for those that need it. The judge's bench is raised, usually 16 inches above the rest of the room, with a small vestibule at 6 inches higher, and then steps or a ramp to get up to the desk. The witness stand is between the judge and the jury, facing the attorney tables. They are raised 10 inches off the ground, slightly lower than the judge, but higher than everyone else. They need a couple of steps and a ramp to get up to this height, and from there everything is pretty straightforward. The corner bench layout basically just moves the judge into the corner, with everyone else ordered radially around them. An interesting thing happens with the Jeffersonian Revival, where the jury is presented right in front of the judge rather than off to the side. This more accurately represents the relationship of power, since the jury ultimately decides the case. And it makes it so that the lawyers and witnesses are able to address the jury and the judge simultaneously without splitting their attention. The witness stand is also presented centrally instead of in a corner, ensuring that all attention is on them. This is ideal since it decentralizes the judge, but it also makes things like sidebars more difficult, since lawyers can't easily address the judge without the jury hearing. But either way, many contemporary courthouses are considering if this arrangement could be more ideal.
I think if you have a jury in front of the judge, definitely the sightlines during examinations make perfect sense. But then you're also probably separating the judge from the other lawyers, so they're probably further back. The inability to sidebar with the judge would be a huge issue.
Furniture does a lot of the work in accommodating people sitting for long periods of time, offering them comfortable conditions, working surfaces, access to power and computers, and also security. The built-in furniture is usually called millwork, which denotes its custom design and installation within the space. It's usually made of wood, or at least looks like wood, And things like the judge's bench, the clerk's bench, and the jury box have very specific specifications. The most notable is that they need to be made of ballistic-resistant materials on their fronts and sides. And while it looks like solid wood, as I mentioned, it's actually made of a special type of plywood that has an interior layer of material called Armortex. This material is composed of layers of woven, ballistics-grade fiberglass cloth impregnated with a thermoset polyester resin and compressed into flat, rigid sheets designed to capture projectiles. This is sandwiched with wood veneers and looks seamless with the rest of the paneling within the space. Entities like the GSA or the General Services Administration, who guides best practices for the design and construction of federal buildings, also suggest that contractors mock up the room with blank MDF furniture inside of a warehouse to test sightlines and to make sure that everything works according to plan. It's funny because these mock-ups are like blank versions of the real thing, stripped of their materiality and the symbolic emblems and objects that we often associate with courtrooms. It's all the forms with none of the surface articulation. It makes it clear just how much wood grain and color figures into the final design. Often some of the aesthetic decisions like the furniture style, fixtures, and even access to things like daylight are tailored to the individual preferences of the presiding judges and staff. While things like windows and daylight are welcome additions to any space people spend hours of their day within, it's often very difficult to get windows into spaces like a courtroom.
With these a lot of these sort of mid-century courthouses that were created, often there aren't any windows. It makes a big difference when you're stuck inside of a room for 8 hours, whether there are windows or not.
Also, unbroken sightlines into the space is a security risk. There's an entire historical building in downtown Chicago here, owned by the government and left to rot empty, just because it has windows that look inside of the federal courthouse skyscrapers next door. But when windows are possible, they're often in the form of clear stories, which are raised windows above eye level that are there for letting in light, but not usually for viewing out of or within. Windows in courtrooms are made more difficult by the fact that the entrances on all sides of the room are usually surrounded by hallways. Some clever solutions enclose the hallway while allowing for the windows above. This choreography of people outside the courtroom causes logistical logjams. Cell blocks, jury suites, judges' chambers, supporting rooms, attorney-witness conference rooms, waiting areas, all these have strict connections that need to be maintained and security barriers that ensure people stay in their designated areas. Behind the bench is a hallway connecting directly to their judges' chambers. The same is true for the jury box, which is directly connected to the deliberation room. Areas like these are separate little suites, completely acoustically isolated from other spaces. This isolation is ensured using special details and materials that block sound transmission. This often includes multiple layers of drywall, mineral wool insulation, and acoustic filler. And these spaces can't share things like HVAC ducts or anything like that which will carry sound between them. Overall, courtroom design is a product of tradition, evolving values, and practical considerations. It serves as a case study for understanding how design can influence power dynamics and shape the administration of justice. The design of a courtroom can have a psychological impact on those involved in the proceedings.
There's something about the way that, courtrooms are portrayed on TV, and often, they're building it from scratch or they're using the fancy ceremonial courtrooms. It kind of makes it reflect the seriousness and the solemnity of the things that are being decided. Often, someone's life could be at stake depending on what happens.
Courtrooms aim to prioritize function. They also embody elements of symbolism, ritual, and personal taste, reflecting a complex interplay between tradition, technology, and human beliefs in the pursuit of justice. In preparation for this video, I brushed up on my knowledge of areas and lengths to better understand the inner workings of courtrooms. I was able to do this in the most engaging and entertaining way possible over on Brilliant in their foundational math course. Brilliant walked me through a series of explorations using sweeping angles and shapes. The lessons are so well designed that they feel like a video game. You can rotate angles and watch the physics unfold. It really helped sharpen my thinking around geometry of courthouses. All this is what makes Brilliant great. It helps keep me sharp while exploring the world on my own time, like a personal learning coach. Obviously, continuous learning is essential to our careers and satisfying our curiosity, staying up to date on the latest innovations, and keeping mentally sharp. And Brilliant makes it easy to build a daily learning habit. Its visual, hands-on approach is such an effective and engaging way to master the key concepts behind today's technology. You can do it anywhere on all sorts of devices. I'll start one on my computer and then just pick it up later in the day on my phone. Brilliant was built for busy people like us, with bite-sized lessons that break down important concepts into understandable parts. And they have thousands of lessons, from foundational and advanced math to AI, data science, neural networks, and more, with new lessons added every single month. To try out everything that Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, visit brilliant.org/Stewart Hicks or click on the link in the description. The first 200 of you will get 20% off of Brilliant's annual premium subscription. Enjoy. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Also, leave a comment with your thoughts about courtroom designs. I love engaging the discussion. While you're here, check out some of these other videos which come out every other Thursday. See you over there.